President Trump says he's designating Antifa as a major terrorist organization. In a social media post, he calls Antifa a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster and says he's recommending those funding them be thoroughly investigated. President Trump considered classifying Antifa as a terrorist organization in his first term, but his own FBI director testified that Antifa is an ideology, not an organization. Now experts say it's nearly impossible to label the movement as a terror group under U.S. law.
A Mercy and Headlands News Washington Bureau Managing Editor Catherine Folders and a Mercy and Headlands News legal contributor James Sample are here with more on that. Hi to you both, SO Catherine. Antifa doesn't have set leaders or an organized structure. How will this work? Well, it's actually not immediately clear how such a designation will be made, Diane. As you mentioned in your introduction, Antifa is really more of an umbrella term describing far-left militant groups that oppose fascists and neo-Nazis. So it's not clear exactly how the government would move forward with this.
Antifa does not have a publicly known centralized structure or leadership here. So, of course, you see the president's post on the screen, which says he is designating them as a major terrorist organization. But again, it's unclear exactly how he is going to follow through on that, given there is no centralized
structure or leadership with this ideology, if you will. And James, you say the administration has no legal authority for designating domestic groups as terrorist organizations, and that doing so raises First Amendment concerns. Why? Well, so if you're talking about foreign organizations, you can designate them as terrorist organizations. But in the United States, individuals, including citizens and non-citizens, have First Amendment rights, and those include the rights of speech and assembly. So given that, as you said, Christopher Wray even testified to Congress that this is an ideology, a movement much more than is an organization with a central headquarters or centralized leadership.
You're essentially talking about designating individuals based on beliefs, based on opinions, however abhorrent, as opposed to addressing their actions. And that is the equivalent of viewpoint discrimination at the hands of the government. The Bill of Rights exists and the First Amendment exists to protect individuals who are unpopular from those who are powerful, and particularly the government.
And you couldn't argue that this is the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater, which is the famous exception?
Well, the idea here is that there are statutes on the books in the United States that allow authorities to go after and prosecute terrorist-related activity. The focus of federal law enforcement is to prevent those actions before they occur. But this is different. Shouting fire in a crowded theater is the legal equivalent of inciting a dangerous and imminent unlawful action that could harm others. Simply holding an ideology, however, is not a crime in the United States. You cannot prosecute ideology, and historically, attempts to do so have not gone well. Think about the Red Scare or the McCarthy era. Prosecuting ideas has always proven problematic to SO Catherine. What more can you tell us about this potential investigation into Antifa's funding? Exactly as you just said, prosecuting ideology is not the path forward.
How do you do that? How are they investigating that? Of course, it was not immediately clear how federal authorities might make use of such a designation. Therefore, how is the Department of Justice, for example, and investigators going to go about actually investigating this? At least I'm told behind the scenes that is part of the discussion happening right now.
So really, how substantial this will be is still to be determined. But again, the question remains, how do you even prosecute this in the first place? We'll have to wait and see what the administration ultimately says so far. Trump hasn't provided clear answers beyond posting that message on social media last night. And James, the Trump administration has previously justified military strikes on alleged Venezuelan drug traffickers by classifying cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. If a similar classification were applied to Antifa and they were labeled a terrorist organization, how would that change the way law enforcement in the U.S. handles these cases?
It's unclear, and it's unclear for the reasons that you just heard, which is to say that because there is not a domestic legal framework to go after domestic organizations that are terrorist organizations, if in fact they are designated as such, it's not clear that there are additional tools that would follow from the designation. There are many tools in place.
The question is whether those tools are being underutilized. And this applies to right-wing white supremacist groups just as much as it would apply to Antifa. The idea of targeting groups by designating them as something isn't clear in terms of what it would actually accomplish or how to expand the administration's options. All right, Catherine Folders, James Sample, thank you.